largest in-person event we've hosted since returning, so thank you all so much for being part of it with us. And of course, thanks for all your patience with getting started tonight. So, we're so excited to host tonight's launch, but before we get started, I just have a few quick housekeeping notes to get out of the way. First off, of course, I want to give a huge thank you to First Unitarian for allowing us to use their gorgeous space for tonight's event. If you need to use a restroom at any point, they are to the left of the entrance down the stairs. And then lastly, I know that many of you picked up a book when you purchased your ticket, but as I said earlier, in case you didn't, we still have plenty of additional copies of Sweet Enough available for purchase, as well as a few of Nothing Fancy and Dining In, all of which have been pre-signed by Alison. So, tonight, it is my privilege to introduce Alison Roman and Aminatou, who join us tonight to celebrate the launch of Alison's newest cookbook and first ever dessert book, Sweet Enough, which features everything from a one-bowl cake batter to a savory, flaky galette to a show-stopping ice cream cake. Alison Roman is a New York-based cook, writer, and author of the New York Times bestselling cookbooks Nothing Fancy and Dining In. She is the host and producer of CNN's More Than a Cooking Show with Alison Roman, the creator of the bi-weekly YouTube series called Home Movies, and the author of the bi-weekly newsletter titled A Newsletter. As I mentioned earlier, Aminatou joins Alison in conversation tonight. Aminatou is a writer, interviewer, and cultural commentator. She is the co-founder of Tech Lady Mafia and the co-host of the podcast Call Your Girlfriend. All right, that's all from me. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Alison and Aminatou.
Can a church person help?
We need God.
We need God. No, I trust. Okay, does it work now? Yes?
Keep talking, I'm going to try to...
Okay, keep talking. Knock knock.
We're not good at this, all right?
I have good knock knock jokes. Sorry, you're missing out. You guys sold out the synagogue, so we're here.
Yeah,
that's
we tried, no offense.
And Alison really loves you because I would have started hours ago, but she was like, the people are waiting in the rain, they got here on time, so give yourselves another round of applause.
Thank you for waiting in the rain.
This is how long it takes to seat 500 of you. Now we know. Hey, congrats.
Thank
Your
you.
book coming out tomorrow.
I know, how exciting. Some of you already have it.
Yeah, who already has the book? Everyone?
Oh, good. Yes,
Great.
thank you so much. So it comes out today for some of you.
We love to hear it. I guess I didn't know this until not so long ago, but you started as a pastry chef. So
I did.
Why is it book number 3 that's the dessert book and not book number 1? Tell me the story.
Because I don't like desserts that much. I feel like, so I started working as a pastry chef a million years ago because it was the only job available in the restaurant that I wanted to work at. So it was less about like a die-hard passion for baking, which I've never had, and more of a desire to like be in a restaurant and more of a desire to be in a restaurant and like cook and learn. And I was like, I'll take whatever job you have, and that was the job they had, so that's what I did. And then it was like, the more I did it, the more I was like, okay, well, this is what I do now. I'm a pastry chef. So, but the thing is that I've learned from really amazing chefs and pastry chefs that like also kind of didn't like dessert. And it was like a secret. It was like a secret society of people who professionally made desserts, but like didn't like them that much. And it was a really good tell, I think, of how good a dessert could be if we were like, wow, this is really good. Because we're the hardest audience as people who are not that into desserts. So that was sort of like the beginning. But blah, 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 fast forward, career stuff, I did other things. And was sort of happy to shed that, which like shed the sort of dessert persona because my interests were definitely more in savory cooking and savory food. And my editor for the first 2 cookbooks after the cookies from Dining In were such a success, she's like, I think dessert should be your second book. And she really pushed hard for it. And I was like, if I do that, then
that it's gonna nosedive for me, because like my heart wasn't in it as much. I was like, I have another savory book in me, and I really want to solidify like my place in whatever cookbook pantheon of like, oh, this is the person we go to for dinner. And I wasn't quite ready to be like, here's a take on something else. Like, and I'm really glad I did it that way, because Nothing Fancy ended up being more widely read than Dining In. And so I think had I just done dessert, it would have been like, who is she? And we're all still asking ourselves, who is she? We don't know.
Who is she? Well, she's Alison Roman. I'm curious also when you approach a book like this, because I was lucky enough to get to see you work on this book, and I'm like, I write words only. That's my thing. I was really blown away with the process that you have to make a cookbook. And so I'm just really curious if you can talk about, how you, when you sit down to like make this book, how does that start? Is it like, do you open a doc? Do you open a Dropbox? Like, what's the first, okay, the book is starting to become real?
Yeah, it's 400 Google Docs open, unorganized, in no special organization, rhyme, or reason. And sometimes they have a title, sometimes they don't. That's fun. Sometimes they have recipes, sometimes they have just numbers. Sometimes it's just ingredients. Sometimes it's a sentence. So that's where the book starts. And then it's sort of like, gums from here. And because I knew this was a dessert book, that was like much further along than the other two, where I was like sort of starting with such a broad like category of just like food and like dinner, and having desserts was really kind of a nice departure to be able to like organize my thoughts of being like, okay, well, if me, a non-dessert lover, is going to make a dessert book, what does that even look like? And so I just started the way that the others start, which is with a table of contents. And effectively I approach it like as if I'm writing a menu. And like, would I want to eat here? Would I want to go to that restaurant? Would I like that bakery?
Wait, so I want to understand, you start with the table of contents first?
Yeah, it makes me feel very accomplished. I'm like, I've got hundreds of words already written. I've got pages, this is basically done. Yeah.
I love that. And so does that table of contents, the doc, when you treat that like a menu, that's kind of the thing that you go back to and you're like, okay, I like this, I don't like this can shift, and not. And then do you start like cooking from there, or are you just like thinking about like what can work?
No, it kind of goes from there, and I'll go recipe by recipe and develop them. And with this book, because it was a first single subject, there were recipes that I've had in my repertoire for a really long time that I was able to pull from. Like, it wasn't completely blank slate. There's like, I went deep into the archives. People are like, what were the books you read to inspire you when you made this book? And I honestly read my own recipe books from when I was like 19. And they're just like falling apart, but I still have them shockingly through like 8 apartments. And they just have measurements and no method. There's no instructions. It's just like, it says like a word, numbers, ingredients, and I had to like remember. I like went into the matrix and was like, ooh, 19-year-old me really knew a lot of stuff. And I had to remember how to make things, but that was like, you know how when you, I don't know if you've felt this way, but like in New York when you're walking around and you're like, I'm so dependent on Google Maps that if you drop me off at like West 4th and whatever, I would be like, I just moved here, I don't know where I am. And like the ability to have so much information like at the ready changes our brains. But at that time when I was learning how to cook and learning how to bake and do desserts, I just had ingredients and I had to really learn how to make them. Like, okay, I know that the eggs always go with this, I know that the flour always goes with this. Like, it's burned into my brain, and I was really surprised at how much I remembered. That's a bit of a tangent, not what you asked at all. I'm doing great.
I love it. I was like,
and then in 2004, but so I go like recipe by recipe, but yeah, so I pulled some from the archives, some that I just had never had before, but I was like, that sounds really good to me, or a version of something that I've never quite been satisfied with.
From a
scone, it's a scone.
A scone. What was one recipe that you were like, I know for a fact, like, I know that this is going to be there? Like, what were the hits that you were like, okay, this is not a thing I need to think about too much. They were just going to be in.
You know, this book, more than the others, I definitely did a lot of rearranging because I knew the chapters. I knew it was like, okay, I know that I want to like break down the book by, to me, like what I think are the most important dessert archetypes. So like cakes, pies, tarts, galettes, which have to be together because on their own they're too similar and my Virgo brain can't handle the disorganization. And then like puddings, I was like, that's gotta be in there. So I did it that way, and I was like hell-bent on like those all being included. And then from there, I was like, well, what are the most delightful versions of those archetypes that I can put in that I feel like are gonna be there? And from, you know, past recipes, I try not to include too many recipes that have been published before in books, because I feel like books are their own unique like collection of things that I also feel like it's nice if you can only get a recipe in a book rather than like, I'm gonna Google it. It's like, well, you can't trust the internet. So there were like a few, like there's like a strawberry cake in there that you're actually in the photo of. Not the one with Evan, but the other photo. Where I was like, damn, that cake is good. And like a blueberry cornmeal tart, both recipes I had published prior that I was like, those have to be in. There's a version of a crepe that I used to make as a young pastry chef. And I knew that that had to be in because it was like a seminal recipe for me in like, it just felt important to the arc of the story. As good of a recipe as it is, it also had like an emotional connection. So I was like, it's gotta be in there.
I want to touch back on something that you just said about how you were very like set on, you know, like thinking about format, right? It's like the recipe makes more sense in the book format. I'm wondering if you can like kind of expand a little on your philosophy about that, because I think that like, you know, it's like, there's a lot of content, it can live all kinds of places. What becomes a video versus what becomes a recipe versus, because I think that you have such a strong ability to figure out like the right format for a thing. So I'd love to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, there is a lot of content. I'm glad you brought that up. I ask myself that a lot, where like, what is a newsletter recipe versus what is a book recipe versus what is something I'm just gonna make for myself and it's never getting published versus what goes in, you know, a YouTube video. And I think that like there are certain things that are, they just, not to be like it's a vibe, but it is a vibe. And there's certain recipes that in this book where I'm like, none of these recipes would ever belong in another cookbook, but they belong in this one, if that makes sense. Like the snack breakfast chapter where it's like scones and like pancakes and waffles, recipes that deserve to exist because I think they're really excellent, but they would never appear in like a dinner book. And so that was sort of like an obvious choice. But, you know, we think a lot about I say we, I don't know where they're sitting, but oh, hi, we think a lot about like, okay, like what makes a good video versus, you know, something, and the answers are not always the same. It doesn't mean that a recipe shouldn't exist, but I think for the book, the thing that is most exciting is that you get to really control the narrative, and I dream that each and every one of you are sitting with the book page by page and reading every word in sequential order. And I know that's like not really how people use cookbooks, but to me, they are a story. It's like an album that you want to listen to start to finish rather than like just going to your favorite song.
It is like an album. Also, I'm the weirdo who I do read the cookbook, like from friends.
Which I appreciate.
Because people put a lot of hard work writing. I mean, also everybody is not a very strong writer, but you happen to be like very voicey, so I guess like, yes, you're welcome, but also
Thank you and yes.
Also, yes, and yes, but I just, you know, I think that that's an important thing that you're saying about like wanting to tell a story. And so when you are, I'm so focused on process because selfishly it's, so, you know, I was like, I'm so curious how other people
there on the photo shoots, and so you saw like a chunk of the process that is like, I think the fun part. I mean, it's all fun, right?
But also just, I just find that it's so much work. It's so much work. I think that anybody who writes like knows how hard writing is, and then on top of it, I was like, oh, you have to figure out everything else. Like that's,
yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm like, that's insane to me. But when it comes to the writing, like when you sit down to do that part, how much of it is, you know, like what is the vibe? Is there a vibe, or do you have like a, you know, like kind of a stronger process for that, where you're like, because you have to convey information to people. It's like they have to know how to actually make the thing, which is pretty technical, and also like translate that into something that's not, you know, like super intimidating and also very clear.
Or boring, yeah. And I think when I first decided, or when I first realized I want to write cookbooks, like that's what I want to do with my life, I was sort of reacting to the fact that I felt like cookbooks weren't that fun to read. As like a person who enjoys the words part, I was finding myself just going for the recipe. I was like, I'm not like connecting here, even though like the food is good. And so that became a really important part of like any book that I write, to have the writing feel strong. And that's like a goal to just like be a strong writer in general, like through the years, and I feel like that's like a lifelong pursuit. But having like the choice to make when you're writing something, like, can I be funny or can I be helpful? And sometimes you have to make that choice, and it's painful. But like, I'm like, oh, I'm so funny and charming, but like, if I don't include this information, they're gonna not have a good time at all. And so, in the edit process, you really do make those cuts. And you know, unfortunately, like the funny, charming, whatever aside, that like I think is hilarious, is the first to go, because otherwise you're gonna be like, oh, I wish I had known that fact before, or this tidbit of information was like really gonna make or break. You know, it's gonna be the difference between me having like a cake and like whatever this is. And so, you know, but that a lot of that happens in the editing room. And the editing room, wow. It's a computer and it's just me. But yeah, it's like, but now with book 3, I'm sort of more self-editing where I'm like, this isn't gonna make the cut. Like, I know that like, I'm delighted by this, but we gotta keep it moving. And, you know, but I think that is the beauty of books as well. Whereas like in a newsletter, for better or for worse, a person can be as long-winded as they want. And some people are, myself included. But I do think that like having looked at magazines really trained me to be like, okay, I have to get this 200 word whatever that I think is so important into 80 words, because otherwise it's not gonna fit.
It's not gonna fit.
It's just simply not gonna fit.
Well, you know, you mentioned the we before. You have a lot of new collaborators on this project, and you know, I wonder like if you could talk about that also. Like, how do you choose? You know, it's like you've had 2 blockbuster books. It's like new book. Do you work with the same people? Do you start with new people? How does that kind of alchemy come together to make the book that people have in their hands?
Yeah, I mean, because this was my 3rd book after like a 3-year, I guess it's like 3.5 year. I'm not going to call it a hiatus because books really come out every 2 or 2.5 years, so I just took a year off because of the pandemic.
You're assuming that people just pump out 3 books.
I mean, sometimes,
It's like
to some people in this room, I would pump out a book every 2 years. No, but I did need like the extra time, and I think a part of that was like, I mean, so much change in the last 3 years. I also wanted this book to be reflective of that, and I think I had a real instinct to be like, I'm just going to go with the same team because it worked. And that was feeling safe to me, and I was feeling like I needed to feel like safe in like creating this book, because I was feeling like vulnerable, and I was feeling like, okay, I'm like coming back out there again, but I sort of did the opposite thing, and I just worked with an entirely different team. And the actual team of people who made the book was like half the people, and I just decided that I wanted this specific book to have like a real, like juicy, very intimate feeling, and the only way to really accomplish that is by having fewer people around. So it was like me, the photographer, Chris Bernabeo, who's incredible, he had never shot food before. But that was
a fashion photographer.
yeah,
right?
and that was on purpose. I was like, I don't want a person who shoots food, because then your book looks like every other book. And that is like an Enneagram 4. Any people who know the Enneagram in this room, hallmark of the type, hates to not feel like an individual. So I was like, okay, well, if I really want to push myself and like the genre to feel or look different, you have to take a leap like that. And that was the best decision I made. And it was totally magic. And I didn't have a prop stylist. I did everything myself. Thank you, Etsy.com, for all your support, not financially, just emotionally and logistically. And a wonderful woman named Jane, who was our assistant on set. And all 3 of us kind of did everything. And it really reminded me of like working in a restaurant, where like it doesn't matter who you are, what you do, what your title is, you do everything. You take out the trash, you call the shots, you write the menu, you stay late, you come early, you lift up a thing, you wipe down the other, like it's just like, it was a super highly collaborative, like very much all hands on deck experience, and I just don't know that I could ever make a book any other way ever again. And it was infinitely harder than having the actual support one needs to make a cookbook, but also infinitely more gratifying and like personal. And I think the book is better for it.
I agree.
And worked with also a different designer, whose name is Britt Cobb, who was just like, I've never met anybody upon like first meeting that got what I was trying to do better, like no notes. And that never happens. But he's so good at his job, and so is Chris. Like everybody that I worked with was just like, so good at what they did, and I trusted them so implicitly that they were able to like put their spin and their mark on the project, and like it vibed so well with what I wanted to do. It was like a really like not effortless, but like really beautiful creative experience.
I mean, it's funny that you use that word effortless, because certainly I think that a thing that is that attracts a lot of people, you know, to the work that you do is that it looks like it's easy, right? It's like it's fun, it's exciting,
We have fun.
and I mean, yes, we always have fun, but I think that I am just like personally really struck by how much work it is. You know,
Yeah.
it's like there's creative direction, there's whatever, and also you think so much about pushing the form forward. Like I think that it's fair to say a lot of cookbooks look the same because we live in a trends-based industry, and
Right.
you know, like, no offense to anybody in publishing here, but that's, you know, like that's what they do. You know, but I just like, I guess I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you think about that, also, about like being someone who is like pushing the form forward, and how that creativity like translates to the food that you're making.
Yeah, I mean, food is tough because I'm not gonna like invent a new ingredient to work with. And like baking especially is sort of like, oh, flour again. You know, like we are doing the same shit every page. But there's not, it's like my favorite Thanksgiving question where they're like, I don't want turkey, like another bird, question mark? And I'm like, there is no other bird, my friends. I don't know what to tell you. But there's like, you know, you are somewhat limited. And I think that limiting your exposure to like quote unquote trends is the only way to like at least try to make something that isn't responsive to that. But yeah, I don't know, I feel like I want to always make something that feels new. And I won't always succeed at that because we've all done that. Or like I did or said or made something amazing and someone's like, oh, that exists. And you're like, oh fuck. And that happens all the time. But I think the effort there is something like worth noting. And those are the people that I respond to as like people who make things in the world. The writers, the movie makers, the artists. And that feels like a thing that I aspire to. That I'm like, I want to make something that feels like really genuine and that involves you like not consuming other things in your own medium.
Tell me what the like funnest parts of like working on this book were.
Oh gosh, the writing it's gotta be the writing. No, I'm kidding, that's hell. Writing is awful. It's really hard. And I think that like the most fun part, I mean the photo shoots are so fun. You were there. Did you not have a blast?
The photo shoots are very fun, can concur.
Yeah, and I think like the layout phase is really great because you have like the words, the images, like everything is kind of floating around, and then like the first pass of something where it's like, Britt was like, okay, like he's so professional too, he had like PowerPoint slides, I was like, oh my god, he made the PowerPoints. But it was like so soothing to my brain, but you're like, oh wow, this is going to be a book. Because before that it's very abstract, you're like, again, it's vibes. And then it becomes like an actual thing. And that feels really fun and really exciting. And I'm not just saying this because I'm here now, but like also this part is really fun. Because you do get to sort of talk about it and meet people that are the people like buoying you through the whole thing. And like I can't write books if people don't want to buy them, so this feels really important to me. And it is fun, and I say that now because it's the first day of a 2-month tour, so talk to me in 3 weeks. But right now I'm feeling optimistic.
We're going to open up the floor for questions soon. I believe that there's going to be either a mic that you can have, or you'll like shout your question and we'll figure it out. But I'm going to ask the first audience question.
Okay.
Are there anchovies in this book / savory things?
Okay, so there are, obviously. Trick question, you know there are because you are holding a tin of anchovies.
I know. Trick question.
But yes, and I got a lot of pushback on that from my editor, from my agent, from a horrible review that somebody left me already. It's never too early. Being like, this is a dessert book, why are there anchovies in it? Or like, there's savory recipes in it. And then it was like, well, it's also a dessert book, but there's savory things, but it's a baking book, but some of the recipes don't ask you to bake. Like, what is this? And it's like, well, let me try to explain it to everybody. But like, calling this a dessert book felt weird. Calling it a baking book felt weird. If you look on Amazon.com, the name changes frequently because we're like, is it baking book? Is it dessert book? But I think it's fair to say it's a dessert book. But yeah, I felt like it was important to include savory recipes because A, I'm not a dessert person, as previously mentioned. B, it's not like I'm throwing in like a roast chicken at you. It's like a cauliflower galette. So like, if you're making an apple galette, chances are you can be like, what if cauliflower and cheese? And the answer is yes. And here's a recipe for that. So it's like not a bridge too far. It's like, and also like if I'm gonna do a sweet scone, it's gotta be a scone with cheese. If there's, if I'm teaching you how to make a pie crust, why not take that and put a quiche inside? And so it just felt like a natural connectivity, but there is a section that says savory, and I think that we will all get there. But it was like, people really tried to dissuade me from that. But I was like, that would simply be inauthentic to not include one single anchovy in this book. So
I agree. I love this. Okay, question time. Question, not a comment. If you ask a comment, I will judge you until the end of time. So will everyone else ask a good question. And yeah, so who wants to go first? Right here. Do we have a mic or?
Oh, you're doing great.
Yeah,
I love it.
Shout your question.
You mentioned that the books are like stories and you intend people to go with the story. Do you intend for us to cook through the books? Or like, what is that?
And if you don't, I'll be very upset. Yeah. Sorry, what's your name?
Tara.
Tara asked if I also intend for people to cook through the recipe as I intend them to read it. And the answer is no. But I think, and I also don't really need anyone to read it like cover to cover, but it's more just like, I think a dessert book like this is really like, oh wow, I'm really into puddings right now. You can go to that chapter. And you don't even, read the introduction is all I ask. And there's a giant, I put in this book, there's a giant first page that says read me first. I dedicated an entire page, which like when you're going down to the wire and you're like, we're running out of space, we gotta cut a page. I'm like, please keep the page that says read me first in giant letters. Because if people don't read this, I will be so sad. But no, read it however you want. Do whatever you want in life.
But read the first page. There was another question here. You with the scrunchie on your hand. Yes, 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 yes.
Hi. Hi, Olivia. Okay, third or fourth date, you're romantic, you're hoping for sex, probably. What are you making? If it's the first time I'm cooking for someone, I feel like the first time, I feel like it's got to be something that you're confident in. It's kind of like the adage of like holidays. It's like don't make anything the first time. Stick to that. And like don't try to impress anybody. You also don't know like their interest level necessarily in food. So like sometimes anything is great. So I would say like a roast chicken if you eat meat and a bowl of pasta if you don't. One little leafy spriggy course salad on the side and absolutely no dessert. Maybe fresh fruit. But like you don't want to like imagine like coming out and like there's some wine in your hand and then they're like, and there's flan. And they're like, okay. But maybe we could like move to the couch. But I don't think like you need to do that. So no dessert on the first date. That's too much effort also. Keep them wanting more, Don't give it all away. That deserves round of applause.
Okay, question on top. Yes.
Hi.
Between dining and dancing, which we like to first, what from those experiences, what feedback from those folks did you take when you were approaching this one?
What feedback do I take when approaching this project? I'd say more so than with any book, I didn't take any feedback with this book. I was sort of like, fuck it, book 3, I don't know. Savory galettes. I think that I try to always keep general feedback. The question was, what feedback did you get? Or do you take from the first 2 into the second one? I think for me, I'm always looking for feedback. I definitely love to be like, I don't care, fuck it. I care so much and more than anyone should. And I really, especially when it comes to people's success with recipes. So like one big adjustment we made was really important to me that I include metric measurements in this, both for international people and anyone here who loves a scale. Where my scale is that's nothing. So I think like having the accessibility part felt really important, and just usability and continuing that on. So I think the feedback was more positive reinforcement of people always being like, wow, I love your desserts because they're so accessible, and I needed to make sure that a dessert book was exactly the same and translated the exact same way, which I think I would have done anyway. No cookbook for me, but which is your favorite dessert, so I'm sorry.
It's not my favorite dessert, but you made one for my birthday.
I
It's
didn't
my
think
favorite.
I bought it.
Okay, we're finding out tonight. You got it. It's very nice.
It was nice.
It was a nice cake. I like a dramatic dessert. What can I say? On top, this side. Question. Wow, no. Oh, right here. Yes.
What's your opinion on how British people use the word pudding?
Oh, well, if somebody could turn to that page in the scripture, I'm interested. I do mention that because this book will be going international, and I did want to make sure that people were not confused, but like if anyone has spent any time across the pond, as it were, and it's like a biscuit, a scone, a pudding, you're like, what are we talking here? It is many different definitions. So I do address it. I think it's charming as hell. I think it is whimsical. I think to call a dessert a pudding is so lovely.
I love it.
Yeah.
There was a question back there. Yes, in the green cardigan.
Hi, Doug.
Question, have you worked in special restaurants and can you speak a bit to how you make your work seem so approachable, especially for home cooks and regular everyday people or departments?
Yeah, thank you. It was a question about approachability and how do you get there from working in restaurants and also magazines. But I think it's because I did both, and like especially with desserts, but also savory food, I sort of maintain that like I have seen the hard way. I've done the hard way. I know how to do the hard way. I failed at the hard way. I've succeeded at the hard way. But I know what it is, and I know that I don't make it. I know that I don't want it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to make anyone else do it. And so if there's a better, easier way, I want to like sort of translate that into something easier. Not just as like an act of service, which like I do consider myself to be in the service industry still. Like service journalism feels not right, but there's something there.
Service newsletter. Right?
Service something. I'm servicing. And I think that it's in effort to do that, but it's also selfishly. Like I write recipes for how I actually bake. And I promise you, like I'm never doing anything for myself that I'm not doing for you and vice versa. Like I would never ask you to do something that I wouldn't want to do, and I promise I'm not like secretly making more complicated things and being like, no, but you do it this way. Like it's less good, but whatever. No, like no, we're all cooking the same way. We're all cooking the same things, and that sort of goes back to like the books. Like I make everything in the books. Like they're not food styled. There's no food stylist. They're just made, and like hopefully the thing that you make looks like that thing. And so I think by just sort of staying true to that, that's how I make the decision. Like, is this too much for even me, who is like pretty lazy most of the time?
Is this too much will be my cookbook name.
Yeah.
Yes, right here in the middle. Yes. Yeah. Happy birthday!
Happy birthday! Not a pudding. Awkward for that. Yeah, the question is, what would you bring to your first day at the office? Okay, first day at the office, bit of a different departure from the first day question, but no less important. Okay, we want to impress, but not too much. It's like, what can we bring? I would say something that can be easily shared, so it's got to be a cookie, which I'm sorry is like one of the smaller chapters in the book because I think that cookies are fine mostly, but I feel passionately about shortbread. So I would bring something like that because it also is like, a cake feels more like, whoa, this person's coming on really strong. But like a cookie is like that's so thoughtful, like a nice little snack. You know, you want to be like, oh, that's, and then graduate to cake. Cake in like 6 months.
Cake if your coworkers are nice. Also, like,
Yeah, we don't know who these people
yeah,
are.
we don't know these people.
Trust no one yet.
Right here.
As someone who loves cooking and has found a lot of inspiration from you watching and reading all your content, I've never really developed a recipe from scratch. And I'm wondering, as you are approaching writing this book, and you pull some recipes from your past and making some new ones, is there one that you feel particularly proud of in this book, one that you work really hard on, and like, when you hit it, you're like,
Yeah, I mean, hopefully all of them, but there were some where like I kind of knew, I was like, oh, I already hit that like months ago, and so now I'm talking like, you what? Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm bad at this. The question was, are there any recipes in this book that you're especially proud of, that you're like, damn, when I like made that, was I like, that's really good. And yeah, so most of them, but there are some that give me more trouble. And there was one recipe that I was very close to just abandoning because I couldn't get it right. It's in the savory section. It's like a tomato tart, and I was so annoyed by all the tomato tart recipes in the world that like ask you to like slice a tomato and then salt it for 8 hours and then roast it and then like put it in the freezer and then like smush it and then put it back together or whatever. And I'm like, can we get on with it? Can't we just put some tomatoes in a crust and call it a day? It turns out you can now with sweet enough. But I like wanted like a really good custom crust, like no pie dough. I wanted just like straightforward method, and I got there. But it really evaded me. It really tried my patience, but we succeeded.
Stripy red hand. There, yes. Can you stand up?
Oh.
Thank you.
You talk about photography a lot, and I noticed that one thing about it is that there's a lot of process shots. Like it's like one shot per recipe. Can you talk about like the philosophy behind like not being like not going to show you how every step should look?
Yeah. The question was is basically for each recipe there's a photo, maybe two or something, but there's very few process shots, and the philosophy behind that. First is because I don't think this book is like a how to make desserts 101. Like, and I wanted to make that very clear. I wanted to sort of make that clear from the beginning, clear from the aesthetic. Also, process shots are not that always interesting. And there's a lot of beautiful ones in the book, but they're more like visual appeal. They're not like, this is what this should look like. And I think that's just like not how my other books are. That's not how I teach people how to cook. I feel like you can do, if you have a great cake recipe where I'm just asking you to measure stuff in a bowl and like whisk some stuff together and put it in the pan, bake it, I don't think you even want all the information. You know, like sometimes more information can be stressful. And I think that with baking books especially, there's an abundance of information because people are so nervous that somebody's not going to know a visual cue or like what this should look like. And it's like, oh, how am I supposed to fold it? And that gives me a panic attack. And I myself am sort of allergic to that style of learning. And I think that if a recipe is written well, that can service the reader as like the information that they need. And also the recipe should be foolproof enough to even if like things are not super tight, you know, they'll still turn out okay. And so that is sort of the meaning behind that. But also it's like page space. And it's just like the writing where you're like, okay, what's gonna go? To me, like, you want to see what the final product looks like. Otherwise, you're not going to want to make it.
We have 2 more questions, so make it count. Because fun hands, yes, here.
What recipes didn't make the cut and why?
What recipes didn't make the cut and why? I actually don't know. Normally, there's like 2 or 3 that don't make the cut, and I'm always glad that they don't, but this one we had room for everything, and it was really down to the wire. It was like, I think there's like 300 and something pages, but books come in, it's like 14-page increments or something, but like, it's not like you can just add another page. Like, they're always either this many pages or this many pages, so if you're over by 1, you have to, or if you're over by 4, you either commit and go, you know, 6 more than that, or you cut those 4 pages, but this one we were like on the money. It was like, again, a very tight experience. I say that not in like that was tight, but like, it was clean. It was like it was good.
No pressure, last question. Yes, right here.
I was hoping you could expand on recreating recipes that you made when you were younger, or perhaps turning a family recipe into something that could be reliably reproduced.
Yeah, I didn't do that with this book. The question was, what was the experience of turning like an old family recipe or something I had as a child into something for this book? My mom's here. Hi, Mom. Not much of a baker, but
The recipes from when you were 19.
yeah. But it was sort of like, because I got started baking like as a professional, it was less about like translating, like to translate a home cook recipe to a home cook feels easier, but the sort of like restaurantification and like reverse engineering that, there were a lot of adjustments to be made, and a lot of it is like in scaling, like this makes like 72 crepes. I'm like, well, we simply don't need that many crepes. So how are we going to scale back? But also what makes sense, because when you're working in a restaurant, a lot of things make sense for that space based on equipment, the kind of storage you have, and so you do things differently. So kind of like going back and saying like, well, how can I do this with like my same pot that I have, or like the bag of flour that I have? It was just kind of cooking through things and saying like, does this work in my home kitchen? Which is like, you know, I test everything in the kitchen that maybe you've seen. It's like, you know, pretty regular. So yeah, that's it. That was it. That was a weird answer from that kid.
Thank you everyone for coming out in the
Thank
rain
you so
tonight.
much. What happens now? There we go.
I'm just going to pop up one last time to remind folks, if you haven't gotten a copy of Sweet Enough, we have signed copies available. If you've already got one, get another one. All right, everyone's getting up. Let's give these two one last round of applause.